Sterile Sheikh doubted his maid's pregnancy. What DNA test revealed changed everything, a true love story. Welcome, beautiful souls. Whether you're a new light joining our circle or a cherished returning spirit, we embrace you with open hearts. Share your name and join us on this journey of love and healing. Every story here is crafted with divine intention. Take a deep breath and let your heart's wisdom guide you home. The scorching Dubai sun painted the marble halls of Al Mansour Palace in hues of gold and amber as Kiana Joseph straightened her uniform, her dark skin gleaming with quiet dignity. At 23, she carried herself with a grace that seemed inherited from generations of strong black women who had come before her. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, she had never imagined that life would lead her to this opulent palace in the heart of the Emirates. The decision to leave America hadn't been easy. With a master's degree in international relations from Howard University sitting fresh in her drawer, taking a position as household staff seemed like a step backward to many. But Kiana had always seen life differently. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes, baby girl, the longest road home starts with a step that looks like it's going the wrong way. The palace itself was a masterpiece of modern Arabian architecture, a stunning blend of traditional Islamic design and contemporary luxury. Crystalline chandeliers hung from intricately carved ceilings, their light dancing off marble floors imported from Italy. But it was the library that had first captured Kiana's heart, with its towering shelves of leather-bound books reaching toward ornate domed ceilings. Her first week had been a whirlwind of learning protocols and palace etiquette. Mrs. Rodriguez, the head of household staff, had taken one look at Kiana's resume and raised an eyebrow. Overqualified, she had muttered, but there was something in Kiana's quiet determination that made her give the young woman a chance. The other staff members were a diverse tapestry of nationalities: Filipinos, Indians, Pakistanis, and a handful of Europeans. Initially, they had watched her with curiosity. An African-American woman in their midst was unusual, especially one who spoke with such refined eloquence and carried herself with such natural poise. It was on her third morning, while arranging fresh roses in the main hall, that she first encountered Sheikh Rashid Al Mansour. He had emerged from his office, deep in conversation with his business advisors, when their eyes met. Time seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Kiana noticed how his sharp business suit contrasted with the traditional kandura he sometimes wore, much like how this palace bridged two worlds. The Sheikh was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with features that spoke of both strength and sensitivity. His eyes held a weight of responsibility that seemed to age him beyond his years. That first glance lasted only seconds, but it left an impression that lingered like perfume in an empty room. Days turned into weeks, and Kiana found her rhythm within the palace walls. Her duties were varied, from organizing formal dinners to managing the Sheikh's extensive library. It was in the library that she often found moments of peace, straightening books and occasionally losing herself in their pages. She didn't know that Sheikh Rashid would sometimes pause in the doorway, watching as she handled his beloved books with the same reverence he felt for them. The palace staff soon discovered Kiana's gift for organization and her eye for detail. When the Sheikh's sister, Princess Amira, needed help planning a charity gala, it was Kiana who stepped in with innovative ideas and flawless execution. The event's success didn't go unnoticed, and soon Kiana found herself being called upon for more than just routine duties. Yet beneath the glittering surface of palace life, Kiana observed the undercurrents of loneliness that seemed to shadow the Sheikh. Despite his wealth and power, there was a solitude about him that resonated with her own. She recognized it in the late hours when she would find him in the library, sitting alone with a book, but not reading it, lost in thoughts that seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Her own story had layers of complexity that few in the palace knew. Back in Atlanta, she had left behind a close-knit family who had initially struggled to understand her choice. Her father, a respected professor at Morehouse College, had wanted her to pursue academia. Her mother, a successful civil rights attorney, had dreamed of Chiana following in her legal footsteps. But Chiana had always felt called to experience the world beyond the familiar confines of home. As autumn approached, bringing slightly cooler breezes to Dubai, Chiana found herself becoming more attuned to the rhythm of palace life. She learned that Sheikh Rashid took his coffee black with a hint of cardamom in the mornings, that he preferred the curtains drawn wide to let in natural light while he worked, and that he often skipped meals when engrossed in business dealings. One evening, as she was replacing the flowers in his office, well after most staff had retired, she found him standing at the window, his silhouette stark against the Dubai skyline. Without turning, he spoke, asking her opinion about the book she had been reading in the library earlier that day. One of his favorites, she would later learn. That conversation, though brief, revealed an unexpected depth to both of them. Chiana spoke of her love for literature and her dreams of writing her own stories someday. The Sheikh shared his passion for poetry, particularly the works of Rumi and Khalil Gibran. In those few minutes, the carefully maintained boundaries between employer and employee blurred ever so slightly. As she left his office that night, Chiana felt something shift in the air between them. Perhaps it was the way he had listened intently to her words, or how his eyes had softened when she spoke of her family back home. Whatever it was, it marked the beginning of a change that would ripple through the palace halls like whispers in the wind. The other staff noticed too, how the Sheikh's eyes would follow her movements when she entered a room, how he would find reasons to visit the library more frequently, how his usual stern expression would lighten when she was nearby. Mrs. Rodriguez watched these developments with a mixture of concern and curiosity, her years of experience telling her that something unprecedented was unfolding within these gilded walls. Yet Chiana remained professional, never overstepping the invisible lines that separated their worlds. She continued her duties with the same grace and efficiency, even as she felt the weight of unspoken words growing heavier with each passing day. Her grandmother had always told her that dignity was a crown that couldn't be bought with gold, and Chiana wore hers with natural elegance. As the days grew shorter and the desert evenings cooler, the palace prepared for the upcoming season of social events and business gatherings. Chiana found herself increasingly involved in the planning, her natural ability to bridge cultures making her invaluable. She understood both the Western and Arabian nuances of etiquette, moving seamlessly between worlds just as she had learned to do growing up in Atlanta's diverse social landscape. What no one yet knew was that this autumn would change everything. The story of a sheikh and his American maid would soon become the talk of Dubai's elite circles, challenging traditions and prejudices alike. But for now, in these early days, it was just beginning, a quiet spark in the opulent halls of Al Mansour Palace, waiting to ignite into something that would change both their lives forever. Chapter 2. More than just a maid. The winter months in Dubai brought with them a gentle coolness that transformed the palace gardens into a haven of blooming jasmine and roses. It was here, among the carefully tended flowers, that Sheikh Rashid found himself increasingly drawn during his evening walks. More often than not, he would discover Chiana there, tending to the flowers long after her duties should have ended. One such evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Rashid paused to watch her. She was singing softly, an old gospel song her grandmother had taught her, her rich voice carrying the weight of generations. The sound stopped him in his tracks, and for a moment He was transported far from his world of business deals and corporate responsibilities. "My grandmother used to say that flowers grow better when you sing to them," Kiana said without turning, sensing his presence. She had become attuned to the sound of his footsteps, the subtle change in the air when he was near. Rashid moved closer, his traditional white kandura rustling softly against the manicured grass. "And what else did your grandmother teach you?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. It was these moments, away from the watchful eyes of the palace staff and his family's expectations, that he felt most himself. Tiana stood, brushing soil from her hands. "She taught me that real strength isn't in what you own or how others see you, but in how you treat people who can't do anything for you." Her dark eyes met his, unflinching and honest. The statement hit Rashid like a physical force. In his world of wealth and privilege, such straightforward wisdom was rare. He had grown up surrounded by people who measured worth in bank accounts and social connections. Yet here was this woman, technically his employee, speaking truths that penetrated the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Their conversations had been growing longer, deeper over the past weeks. It started with simple exchanges about books, Rashid discovering that Chiana's knowledge of literature rivaled his own. Then came discussions about art, philosophy, and life itself. He found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, his fears about leading his family's business empire, the pressure to marry someone from his social circle, and most painfully, his struggle with what doctors had diagnosed as sterility. "Sometimes," he confessed one evening in the library, "I feel like I'm living someone else's life, meeting everyone's expectations except my own." Chiana looked up from the book she was reshelving. "And what are your expectations, Sheikh Rashid?" The question lingered in the air between them. In that moment, watching her among his beloved books, Rashid realized he had never seen anyone fit so naturally into his world, while simultaneously challenging everything about it. But their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Rodriguez had begun assigning Kiana to duties far from Rashid's usual haunts. His sister Amira had started making surprise visits to the library, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The palace walls had ears, and whispers were beginning to circulate. "You know this can only end badly," Amira warned him one afternoon. "She's an American, a maid, and from a completely different world. Think of the family, the business, your reputation." But Rashid was already past caring about reputation. He had never felt more alive than in those stolen moments with Chiana, discussing poetry in the garden, debating philosophy in the library, or simply sharing comfortable silence while watching the sunset over Dubai's skyline. For her part, Chiana maintained a careful professional distance in public, even as their private moments grew more intimate. She understood the delicate nature of their situation. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, reminding her of the complicated history between powerful men and black women. Yet in her heart, she knew this was different. Rashid saw her, truly saw her, not as a maid, not as a black woman, but as herself. The turning point came during a massive charity gala at the palace. Chiana had been instrumental in organizing the event, but on the night itself, she stayed behind the scenes, efficiently managing the staff. Until a crisis struck. The planned entertainment, a renowned pianist, fell ill at the last minute. Rashid found Chiana in the kitchen, calmly directing staff while simultaneously trying to solve the entertainment crisis. Without hesitation, he asked, "You played piano in church, didn't you?" "I've heard you mention it." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. Minutes later, Chiana sat at the grand piano in the ballroom, her elegant black dress, borrowed from the palace's extensive wardrobe, making her look every bit as regal as the guests. Her fingers touched the keys, and the room fell silent as she began to play. a beautiful fusion of classical Arabic melodies with soulful gospel undertones. The performance captivated the audience, but Rashid watched only her face, seeing the passion and joy there. In that moment, as she transformed from invisible staff member to the star of the evening, he made his decision. Society's expectations, family traditions, and business considerations all fell away in the face of one simple truth. He was in love with Kiana Joseph. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the palace had grown quiet, they met in the garden. The jasmine was in full bloom, its sweet scent filling the air. Without preamble, Rashid took her hands in his. "I don't care what anyone thinks," he said softly. "You've awakened something in me that I thought had died long ago. Hope, joy, the courage to be myself. I know the world will have opinions about us, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Kiana looked at their joined hands, his olive skin against her dark complexion, a portrait of contrast and harmony. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "This won't be easy." "The best things in life never are," he replied, pulling her close. Above them, the stars sparkled in the desert sky, witnesses to a love that dared to cross every boundary society had erected between them. But even as they stood there, wrapped in the promise of tomorrow, neither could have predicted the storms that lay ahead. The whispers in the palace halls were about to turn into roars, and their love would soon be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Yet in that moment, in the peaceful garden surrounded by blooming jasmine, they were simply a man and a woman, finding in each other the missing pieces of their souls. Chapter 3. Whispers and Warnings. The morning sun had barely touched the palace spires when Amira al-Mansur stormed into her brother's private study, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like angry percussion. Her Hermes scarf fluttered behind her as she threw a tablet onto his desk. On the screen was a grainy photo of Rashid and Kiana in the garden, their silhouettes close, intimate. "Have you lost your mind?" Amira's voice trembled with barely contained fury. "The gardener's son took this photo. Do you know how much I had to pay to keep him quiet? It's all over the staff quarters already." Rashid looked at the photo, his jaw tightening, not from shame, but from anger at the invasion of privacy. "Who I spend time with is my business, Amira." "Your business?" She laughed bitterly. "Nothing is just your business when you're Sheikh Rashid al-Mansur. Do you think father built this empire for you to throw it away over some American maid?" "Don't call her that." Rashid's voice was quiet but sharp enough to make Amira pause. "Her name is Kiana, and she has more intelligence and grace than half the socialites you keep trying to set me up with." Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Kiana was facing her own interrogation. Mrs. Rodriguez had summoned her to the staff office, her usually stern face now etched with genuine concern. "Mija," the older woman began, her Spanish accent thickening with emotion, "I've been running this household for 20 years. I've seen girls come and go, each thinking they'll be the one to catch the Sheikh's eye. It always ends in tears." Kiana sat straight-backed in her chair, her dignity a shield. "Mrs. Rodriguez, with all due respect, what's between Sheikh Rashid and me is different." "Different?" Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Let me tell you about different. 3 years ago, a Russian ballet dancer caught his cousin's attention. She disappeared back to Moscow with a generous settlement. Before that, a Lebanese entrepreneur's daughter, all different, all gone. But Kiana stood her ground. "I'm not here for his money or his title. I love him for who he is when no one's watching, when he can just be Rashid." The sincerity in her voice made Mrs. Rodriguez pause. In 20 years, she had never heard anyone speak about the Sheikh with such simple, unguarded truth. The day progressed with increasing tension. Word had spread through Dubai's elite social circles like wildfire. Phones buzzed with messages, speculating about the American maid who had bewitched the Sheikh. Some of the crueler messages made thinly veiled racist remarks, wondering if she practiced voodoo, a stereotype that made Chiana's blood boil when she overheard it from gossiping staff members. By afternoon, Karim, Rashid's closest friend and advisor, arrived at the palace. He found Rashid in the library, the one place he always went to think. "Your board members are nervous," Karim said without preamble. "The conservative ones are threatening to withdraw their support. They're saying a relationship with an American black woman, a maid no less, shows poor judgment." Rashid looked up from his father's old desk, his eyes hard. "And what do you think, Karim?" Karim sat down heavily. I haven't seen you this alive in years. But brother, you have to understand what you're risking. It's not just about love. It's about your family's legacy, the business empire your father built from nothing." "My father built this empire so his children could be happy," Rashid countered. "What's the point of all this wealth if I can't choose who to share it with?" As they spoke, Chiana was in the garden, finding solace among her beloved flowers. Her phone buzzed with another message from her mother back in Atlanta. "Baby girl, are you sure about this? These situations, they have a history of not ending well for women who look like us." Chiana's fingers hovered over the phone. How could she explain to her mother that Rashid was different? That when he looked at her, he saw beyond color, beyond class, beyond everything that the world used to divide people. The day's tensions culminated at sunset when the palace received an unexpected visitor. Rashid's aunt, Madame Safia, the family matriarch, arrived unannounced. Her presence commanded immediate attention, her traditional abaya somehow more regal than any modern designer could achieve. She found Rashid in his study. "Your mother would be heartbroken," she said without greeting, "to see you throw away everything over this infatuation." "Aunt Sophia," Rashid began, but she held up a hand. "No, let me finish. I have watched you grow from a boy into a man your father would have been proud of. But this—" She shook her head. "The American girl may be educated, may be beautiful, may even be sincere in her feelings. But she will never belong in our world. Every business deal, every social gathering, every family event will become a battlefield. Is that the life you want?" "The life I want," Rashid said quietly, "is one where I can look in the mirror and recognize the man looking back at me." As night fell over Dubai, Rashid and Chiana met secretly in the palace library. The air was heavy with the day's confrontations. "They'll never accept us," Chiana whispered, her head resting against his shoulder. "Maybe your aunt is right. Maybe I'm being selfish, putting you in this position." Rashid turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. "Do you know what my father told me before he died? He said, 'Son, there are two kinds of wealth in this world, the kind that fills your banks and the kind that fills your soul. I've spent years building the first kind, but with you, for the first time, I've found the second.'" Outside the library windows, Dubai's skyline glittered like scattered diamonds. Inside, two people from different worlds clung to each other, their love a quiet defiance against the storms gathering around them. Neither knew that these whispers and warnings were just the beginning, that their greatest test still lay ahead. As they sat there, surrounded by centuries of books that had witnessed countless love stories, Rashid made a silent vow. No matter what came next, no matter who opposed them, he would fight for this love. What he didn't know was that the greatest threat to their happiness would come not from external opposition, but from his own demons, his own fears, and a tragic misunderstanding that would nearly destroy everything they were building. Chapter 4. A Secret Wedding. The desert night cradled their secret like a precious jewel. Miles from Dubai's glittering skyline, a small oasis had been transformed into an intimate wedding venue. Lanterns hung from date palms, their flames dancing in the gentle breeze, casting golden light across the sand. The moon hung low and full, as if heaven itself had arranged perfect lighting for this clandestine ceremony. Kiana stood in a makeshift bridal tent, her hands trembling as Maya, her closest friend among the palace staff, helped her prepare. She wore a gown that merged cultures, a modern white dress with intricate Islamic geometric patterns hand-beaded along its length, designed secretly by a French couturier who owed Rashid a favor. "You look like something out of a fairy tale," Maya whispered, adjusting the delicate crystal-studded hijab that would cover Chiana's hair during the ceremony. "But girl, are you sure about this? A secret wedding?" Chiana met her friend's concerned gaze in the mirror. "My heart has never been more sure of anything." Her fingers traced the vintage pearl necklace, her grandmother's, the only family heirloom she had brought from Atlanta. "I just wish my family could be here." Meanwhile, in another tent, Rashid adjusted his bisht over his crisp white kandura. Karim, who had finally chosen loyalty to his friend over societal expectations, helped straighten the golden-trimmed cloak. "The Imam is reliable," Karim assured him. "He understands the need for discretion. But brother, are you prepared for the consequences when this eventually comes to light?" Rashid turned to his friend, his eyes filled with a certainty that silenced further questions. "When you find your other half, Karim, you'll understand that some things are worth any price." The ceremony setting was intimate, but meaningful. Only 6 people were present: the Imam, Karim as Rashid's witness, Maya as Chiana's witness, and 2 trusted security guards who had known Rashid since childhood. Small lanterns marked a path through the sand to where the Imam waited beneath an arch woven with jasmine and desert roses. As Chiana walked toward him, Rashid felt his breath catch. The desert wind gently lifted her dress, making her appear as if she were floating across the sand. The lantern light caught the tears in her eyes, making them sparkle like the stars above. In that moment, all the opposition they had faced, all the secrets and struggles, seemed to fade away. The Imam began the ceremony in Arabic, his voice carrying across the quiet desert. He spoke of love's power to bridge all distances, of marriage as a shelter for the soul. When it came time for the nikah, the formal marriage contract, Rashid's voice was strong and clear. "I, Rashid, take you, Kiana, to be my wife, my partner in faith and life, promising to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life." Kiana's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her vows, combining traditional Islamic promises with words from her heart. "I, Kiana, take you, Rashid, choosing you as my husband before Allah and these witnesses. I promise to be faithful, supportive, and honest, to care for you and respect you, to share in your joys and sorrows, as long as we both shall live." The Imam smiled gently as he pronounced them husband and wife. As tradition dictated, Rashid presented Chiana with her mahr, a gift symbolizing his commitment. But instead of the usual jewelry or gold, he gave her something uniquely meaningful, a rare first edition of Rumi's poetry, the same book they had discussed during their first real conversation in the palace library. After the ceremony, under the star-studded desert sky, they shared a small feast, traditional Arabic dishes mingled with American Southern cuisine that Kiana had helped prepare. Her grandmother's recipe for sweet potato pie sitting comfortably next to plates of matchboos and uzi. Maya had arranged for a small portable speaker, and as the night deepened, soft music filled the air. Rashid took Chiana's hand, leading her in their first dance as husband and wife. The melody was a careful blend, an Arabic love song mixed with the gospel hymn Chiana's parents had danced to at their own wedding. "Tell me what you're thinking," Chiana whispered as they swayed together. Rashid pulled her closer. I'm thinking that for the first time in my life I feel complete. Whatever storms come, we'll weather them together. Later, as they prepared to return to their separate lives, Rashid to his wing of the palace, Chiana temporarily maintaining her role as staff to keep their secret, Maya pulled her friend aside. You know this secret can't last forever, she warned gently. Chiana watched as Rashid spoke with Karim, his profile noble against the desert night. Nothing lasts forever, she replied, but some things are worth the risk. As their small group dispersed, leaving the oasis as pristine as they had found it, Rashid and Chiana shared one last moment alone. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Make a wish, Chiana said softly. Rashid kissed her gently. I already have everything I could wish for. They drove back to Dubai in separate cars, maintaining their careful charade. The city's lights grew larger, reality encroaching on their magical night. Neither could have known then that their happiness would soon be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, that their secret union would face challenges that would shake their trust to its very foundation. But for that night, under the vast desert sky, they were simply two souls who had found each other against all odds, their love as boundless as the horizon and as deep as the ancient sands that had witnessed their vows. Chapter 5. Society's Cruel Judgment. The annual Dubai Business Excellence Gala was in full swing at the Burj Al Arab, the city's elite draped in designer wear and dripping with diamonds. Sheikh Rashid stood at the center of a group of investors, his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit marking him as every inch the modern Arabian business leader. But his eyes kept drifting to the edges of the grand ballroom, where Chiana moved efficiently among the staff, coordinating service with a grace that made his heart ache. Their secret marriage was only 2 weeks old, and already the weight of pretense was becoming unbearable. Each time she had to bow her head and say, "Yes, sir," in front of others, he felt a piece of his soul crack. Sheikh Rashid, purred Nadine Al-Farid, daughter of one of Dubai's most prominent banking families, interrupting his thoughts. You seem distracted tonight. She placed a manicured hand on his arm, her intentions clear to everyone watching. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the dessert station. A wealthy businessman had bumped into Chiana, causing her to drop a tray of champagne flutes. The crash silenced the room. Clumsy American, the man sneered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. This is what happens when we don't stick to properly trained staff. Rashid's body tensed, every instinct screaming to defend his wife. But Chiana's eyes met his across the room, a subtle shake of her head holding him in place. She handled the situation with perfect composure, apologizing gracefully while another server cleaned up the mess. But the damage was done. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Did you see how the Sheikh looked at her? I heard she's been giving him private English lessons. Americans have no respect for our traditions. I heard she practices voodoo. The gossip spread through Dubai's social circles like wildfire. By the next morning, the palace was buzzing with speculation. Amira stormed into Rashid's office, her face flushed with anger. It's all over social media, she thrust her phone at him. Anonymous sources claiming you're having an affair with the American maid. Our family name is becoming a joke. Rashid scrolled through the posts, his jaw clenching at the cruel comments and racist undertones. Many suggested Chiana was a gold digger, using black magic to seduce him. Others claimed she was part of an American plot to infiltrate Arab business circles. Meanwhile, Chiana faced her own torment. The other staff members, once friendly, now avoided her. She overheard whispered conversations in the corridors that fell silent when she appeared. Someone had even written "witch" on her locker in the staff changing room. That evening she found refuge in the palace garden, her sanctuary. Maya found her there, crying silently among the jasmine bushes. "They're saying such horrible things," Chiana whispered. Not just about me, but about my culture, my race, my family. Maya sat beside her friend. People fear what they don't understand. And girl, they really don't understand how a black American woman could capture the heart of one of Dubai's most eligible men without some kind of trick. The situation reached a breaking point at the Conservative Business Council's quarterly meeting. As Rashid presented his company's latest financial projections, an elderly board member interrupted. Before we discuss business, Sheikh Rashid, perhaps we should address the rumors. Some of us are concerned about your judgment lately. The room grew tense. Rashid looked around at the faces of men who had known him since childhood, who had worked with his father. Now they looked at him with doubt and disapproval. My personal life is not up for discussion, he stated firmly. It is when it affects shareholder confidence, another member countered. Our clients are traditional people. They expect certain standards. The pressure mounted from all sides. Anonymous letters arrived at the palace, some threatening to expose their secret, others warning of dire consequences if Rashid didn't come to his senses. Even Karim, their steadfast supporter, began to worry. Maybe you should consider making a public statement, he suggested. Get ahead of the rumors. But how could they explain their love to a society that wasn't ready to understand it? How could they justify their marriage to people who saw only the surface, race, class and tradition, rather than the depth of their connection? Late one night, Rashid found Chiana in their secret meeting place in the library. She was reading negative comments on a social media post about her, each word a dagger to her heart. We knew it would be hard, he said, taking the phone from her hands, but we didn't expect this level of cruelty. Chiana looked up at him, her eyes filled with both love and pain. Is our love strong enough to withstand all this hatred? Rashid pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. They can say what they want. You are my wife, my heart, my home. But even as he spoke the words, both knew that the worst was yet to come. The whispers would soon turn to shouts, the judgment to action. Their love, pure as it was, had become a target for every prejudice and fear in their conservative society. As they held each other in the quiet library, surrounded by books that had witnessed centuries of love stories, neither could have predicted how their own tale would be tested. The cruelty of society's judgment was just the beginning. Darker challenges lurked ahead, waiting to strike at the very foundation of their trust in each other. Chapter 6. A Miracle Times 2. The morning sickness hit Chiana like a tidal wave. For the third time that week, she found herself kneeling in her private bathroom, trying to keep her composure as waves of nausea washed over her. Maya stood guard outside, ensuring no other staff members witnessed this moment of vulnerability. Girl, you need to see a doctor, Maya whispered through the door. This isn't just stress. Chiana's hands trembled as she splashed cold water on her face. She'd been counting days in her head, trying to deny what her body was increasingly making impossible to ignore. As a senior staff member, she had her own small suite in the palace's staff wing, a privacy she was now intensely grateful for. Later that afternoon, disguised in an abaya and headscarf, Chiana sat in a private clinic in Abu Dhabi, far from prying Dubai eyes. Maya squeezed her hand as the doctor delivered the news that would change everything. Congratulations, Mrs. Joseph, you're pregnant with twins. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Twins. The word echoed in her mind like a bell toll. The ultrasound screen showed 2 tiny heartbeats, fluttering like butterfly wings. I'd estimate you're about 6 weeks along, the doctor continued. But Chiana barely heard her. Her mind was racing, calculating the implications. 6 weeks, their wedding night in the desert. The drive back to Dubai was silent, her thoughts a storm of emotions. Rashid's words from early in their relationship echoed in her memory. The doctors say I can never father children. It's one of the reasons my family is so desperate for me to marry, to ensure an heir, even if through modern medical intervention. Maya voiced what Chiana couldn't bring herself to say. Rashid thinks he can't have children. When you tell him about this, he'll think I've betrayed him, Chiana finished, her hand protectively covering her still flat stomach. That evening, she paced her room, her wedding ring hanging from a chain around her neck. Their secret still too dangerous to wear openly. How could she tell him, in a society where honor meant everything, where whispers of scandal could destroy not just reputations, but entire business? Empires, how could she explain what seemed medically impossible? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Rashid entered, his face tight with concern. "You missed our meeting in the library," he said softly. "Are you unwell?" Looking at him, this man who had defied his family and society to marry her, Chiana felt her heart break. The joy of carrying his children warred with the terror of how he might react. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "And I need you to listen with your heart, not just your mind." Rashid sat down, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're scaring me, Habibti." "I'm pregnant," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. "With twins." The silence that followed was deafening. She watched as emotions chased across his face. Confusion, shock, and then something that made her blood run cold. Doubt. That's impossible," he said, standing abruptly. "The doctors, they've tested me for years. They all said the same thing." "I know what they said." Chiana reached for him, but he stepped back. "But miracles happen. Please, just miracles." His laugh was harsh, unlike anything she'd ever heard from him. "Or is there another explanation? One that makes more sense?" The accusation in his voice struck her like a physical blow. "How dare you?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "After everything we've been through, how dare you doubt me? How dare I?" His voice rose slightly, still conscious of the need for discretion even in his anger. "I'm sterile, Chiana. That's a medical fact. Yet here you are, pregnant with twins. What am I supposed to think?" "You're supposed to trust me." She fought to keep her voice down, though her hands shook with emotion. "I have never been with anyone else. These are your children, Rashid. Yours and mine." But she could see it in his eyes. The seed of doubt had taken root. Years of medical certainty warred against his trust in her, and uncertainty was winning. "I need time to think," he said finally, moving toward the door. This is too much." "Rashid, please." She reached for him one last time. "Get new tests done. See different doctors. There must be an explanation." He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose there must be." After he left, Chiana collapsed onto her bed, one hand protectively cradling her stomach, the other clutching her wedding ring through her shirt. Outside her window, Dubai's lights twinkled as if nothing had changed, as if her world hadn't just shattered into 1,000 pieces. Maya found her there hours later, tear-stained but composed. "What are you going to do?" Chiana looked out at the city she had come to love, the city that had given her everything and now threatened to take it all away. "I'm going to fight," she said quietly. "Not just for my marriage, but for my children. They deserve to know their father, and he deserves to know the truth, even if he's not ready to believe it yet." But as she spoke the words, a chill ran down her spine. She couldn't have known then how dark things would become, how far doubt and suspicion would drive the man she loved, or how much she would have to sacrifice to protect the precious lives growing inside her. The twins stirred, too small yet to feel, but already changing everything. In the coming days, their very existence would test the limits of love, trust, and faith, pushing both Chiana and Rashid to choices they never imagined they would have to make. Chapter 7. The storm breaks. The Dubai summer heat pressed against the palace windows like a physical force, but inside Rashid's private study, the atmosphere was arctic. He sat behind his father's antique desk, staring at a manila envelope delivered by Hassan, his most discreet security officer. "You're certain about this surveillance?" Rashid asked, his voice hollow. Hassan nodded solemnly. "We've been tracking her movements for the past week, as requested. She visits the clinic in Abu Dhabi every Thursday, always accompanied by Maya." Rashid's fingers traced the edge of the envelope, not yet opening it. The man he had been 6 months ago, the man who had married Chiana under the desert stars, would have been disgusted by his current actions. But that man hadn't faced an impossible pregnancy that threatened everything he believed about himself. Meanwhile, Chiana noticed the changes in the palace atmosphere. Security cameras that had been dormant for years suddenly blinked to life. Her phone began having strange glitches, messages disappearing, calls dropping. Even her private suite felt less private, with new staff members constantly finding reasons to pass by her door. One afternoon she caught a glimpse of Karim leaving Rashid's study, looking troubled. Their eyes met briefly in the hallway before he quickly looked away, guilt written across his features. "They're watching me," she confided to Maya in the garden, their voices masked by the fountain's splash. "I can feel it." Maya glanced around before responding. "Girl, it's worse than that. I overheard Hassan talking to the new security team. They've hired private investigators." The words hit Chiana like a physical blow. Her hand instinctively went to her growing belly, now hidden beneath loose uniforms. At 12 weeks, the twins were her secret strength, but also the catalyst for her world unraveling. In his study, Rashid finally opened the envelope. Photographs spilled across his desk. Chiana entering the clinic, meeting with doctors, even one of her crying in her car afterward. Each image felt like a betrayal, both of her privacy and of what they had once meant to each other. A knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Amira, elegant as always in Chanel, but her face drawn with concern. "The board is meeting tomorrow," she said without preamble. "They're going to ask questions about the pregnancy rumors. We need to get ahead of this." Rashid's laugh was bitter. "Ahead of it? How exactly? Should I tell them my American wife, whose marriage to me is still a secret, is somehow pregnant despite my medical condition?" "Your wife?" Amira's voice dripped with disdain. "Brother, open your eyes. She played you perfectly. An educated American girl taking a job as a maid. Did you never question it?" The doubt that had been growing in Rashid's heart bloomed like a poisonous flower. He thought back to all those nights in the library, their conversations about literature and poetry. Had it all been calculated? A sophisticated seduction by a woman smart enough to know exactly what would appeal to him? That evening, he found himself outside Chiana's door, his hand raised to knock but frozen in place. Through the wood, he could hear her soft voice singing what sounded like a lullaby. The tenderness in it nearly broke his resolve. But then his phone buzzed. Another message from Hassan. "Urgent update regarding KJ's activities. Need to meet." The warmth of the lullaby forgotten, Rashid turned away. In the security office, Hassan presented new findings. "She's been making regular calls to a number in Dubai Investment Park. We traced it to this man." A photo appeared on the screen. Karim's cousin Zafar, a handsome business developer who often attended palace functions. The implications hung heavy in the air. "The timing of the calls," Hassan hesitated. "They correspond to the likely conception date." Rashid gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. "Continue the surveillance. I want to know everything. But that night, alone in his vast suite, doubts of a different kind plagued him. He remembered Chiana's face in the desert, illuminated by lantern light as she spoke her vows, the way she looked at him during their secret meetings in the library with such open adoration it humbled him. Could such love be faked? The next morning, passing through the palace gardens, he saw her among the roses. She looked up, their eyes meeting for the first time in days. The pain and confusion he saw there matched his own. "Rashid," she called softly, taking a step toward him. For a moment, he almost went to her, almost took her in his arms and begged her to explain everything, to make sense of this impossible situation. Instead, he turned away, his words clipped. "Mrs. Joseph, please focus on your duties." He didn't see her crumple onto the garden bench after he left, one hand pressed to her mouth to stifle her sobs, the other cradling her growing belly. He didn't see Maya rush to comfort her, or hear her broken whisper, "He doesn't even call me by my name anymore." That afternoon, Hassan delivered the final surveillance report. Rashid sat in his study, the setting sun casting long shadows across the desk, as he read through the detailed account of Chiana's movements, her calls, her medical appointments. Each page seemed to build a case for his worst fears. But it was the last photo that broke him. Chiana and Zafar, seemingly deep in conversation outside the Abu Dhabi clinic. The image was grainy, probably innocent, but in Rashid's tortured mind, it confirmed everything. With trembling hands, he picked up his phone and made a call. "Karim? I need you to start the paperwork, quietly, and find her somewhere to go, somewhere far from Dubai." As he spoke the words, sealing both their fates, a different kind of darkness fell over the palace. Not the gentle dusk of ending day, but the heavy shadow of trust shattered beyond repair. What Rashid couldn't know was that the photo had captured the moment Chiana was begging Zafar, a fertility specialist, to help her prove the truth. What he couldn't see was the DNA test results in her purse, results that would have changed everything, if only he had been willing to listen. Chapter 8. Betrayal's Sharp Edge. The storm that had been threatening Dubai all day finally broke, rain lashing against the palace. Windows, like nature itself, was weeping. In his study, Rashid stared at the final piece of evidence Hassan had delivered, a detailed report of all contact between Chiana and Zafar, including meetings that coincided with her early morning absences from the palace. Lightning illuminated the room as Chiana entered, summoned by a terse message from Mrs. Rodriguez. She wore a loose-fitting uniform that couldn't quite hide her growing belly, now 16 weeks along. The sight of it made Rashid's jaw clench. "Close the door," he commanded, his voice arctic. Chiana complied, her hand lingering on the doorknob for a moment, as if anchoring herself for what was to come. The air between them crackled with unspoken accusations. "I have some interesting reading material," Rashid began, his tone deceptively casual as he lifted the surveillance report. "A fascinating story about a clever American woman who orchestrated the perfect scheme. Whatever you think you've found," Chiana started, but he cut her off. "I'm not finished." His fist slammed onto the desk, making her jump. "Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? The timing of your employment here, the way you played to my interests, poetry, literature, deep conversations about life. Was any of it real?" Chiana stood straighter, dignity wrapping around her like armor. "Every moment was real. Every word, every touch, every promise we made under those desert stars. And Zafar," Rashid's voice cracked slightly, "were your meetings with him real too?" Understanding dawned on Chiana's face, followed by a flash of hope. "Yes. Yes, they were real because he's a fertility specialist. I've been trying to prove—" "Stop lying!" Rashid rose from his desk, papers scattering. You've been seen with him multiple times, always in secret, always when you thought no one was watching. He was at the palace the week before our wedding. The timing... The timing? Chiana's voice rose, matching his intensity. The timing is perfect, because these are your children, Rashid. Your babies. I've been meeting with Dr. Zafar because he's one of the top fertility specialists in Dubai, and I've been trying to understand how this miracle happened. If you just look at the test results... Test results can be manipulated, he cut in coldly. Money can buy anything in Dubai. Isn't that what you discovered? Including a convenient miracle pregnancy? Chiana took a step back, one hand protectively covering her belly. How dare you, after everything we've shared, everything we've been through together, how dare you stand there and accuse me of such a betrayal? You betrayed me the moment you plotted to trap me with another man's children. His words echoed off the wood-panelled walls. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky as if underlining his accusation. Chiana's face, usually so full of warmth, had gone completely still, like a statue carved from ice. I have loved you, she said quietly, each word precise and sharp. With every breath in my body, I have kept our secret, endured the whispers, accepted being treated like a servant even after becoming your wife. I have watched you pull away from me, doubt me, spy on me. But this... She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. This is too much. Rashid turned to the window, unable to bear the sight of her tears. There's a car waiting outside. It will take you to a private airport facility. A plane is ready to fly you anywhere you wish to go. You'll be well provided for, of course. Of course, Chiana echoed hollowly. Because money solves everything in your world, doesn't it? Just throw enough dirhams at the problem, and it disappears. She reached beneath her uniform and pulled out the chain that held her wedding ring. With trembling fingers, she unclasped it. The small, golden circle caught the lightning's flash as she placed it on his desk. You know what's truly ironic? Her voice was barely a whisper now. I came here today to show you the latest ultrasound, to let you hear their heartbeats. I thought if you could just see them, hear them. She pulled a small envelope from her pocket and laid it beside the ring. But you've already decided what you want to believe. Rashid's hands gripped the window frame, his knuckles white. The car will wait for 1 hour. Pack whatever you need. Everything else will be shipped to whatever address you provide. A bitter laugh escaped her. Pack what? Everything here belongs to the palace. To you. I came with nothing but my heart, and I'll leave the same way. She moved to the door but paused with her hand on the handle. One day, when the truth finally reaches through your pride and paranoia, remember this moment. Remember that you didn't just lose me today. You lost your children, your miracles, and that choice was yours alone. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than if she had slammed it. Rashid stood frozen at the window, watching, as the storm raged outside. 10 minutes later, he saw her emerge into the rain, Maya hurrying beside her with an umbrella. She carried a single small suitcase, her entire life in Dubai reduced to one bag. Just before entering the car, she looked up at his window. Even through the rain, even from this distance, he could feel the weight of her gaze. Then she was gone, the black car disappearing into the storm like a dream fading at dawn. Only then did Rashid sink into his chair, his hand automatically reaching for the envelope she had left. Inside was the ultrasound image and paperclip to it, a DNA test result he had been too proud to ask for, too angry to consider possible. But he couldn't bring himself to read it. Not yet. Not now. Instead, he picked up her wedding ring, still warm from where it had rested against her heart, and finally allowed his own tears to fall. What he didn't know, what his pride and paranoia had blinded him to, was that back in that Abu Dhabi clinic, Dr. Zafar had discovered something remarkable about Rashid's original diagnosis, a truth that would have explained everything, if only he had been willing to listen. Chapter 9. Alone in the Storm. The small apartment in downtown Atlanta felt worlds away from the marble halls of the Dubai Palace. Kiana stood at the window, watching the Georgia rain paint patterns on the glass, so different from the desert storms she'd left behind. At 5 months pregnant, her belly was now prominently rounded, the twins active beneath her gentle touch. "You don't have to do this alone, baby girl," her mother, Patricia Joseph, said from the doorway. A respected civil rights attorney, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that her daughter had inherited. "Come, stay with us. Your old room is still there." Kiana shook her head, watching lightning illuminate the city skyline. "I need to do this my way, Mom. These babies and we need our own space to heal." The apartment was modest but clean, paid for with the substantial settlement Rashid had arranged. The irony of living off his money wasn't lost on her, but she'd chosen to view it as support for his children, even if he refused to believe they were his. Maya had insisted on coming with her, taking a leave of absence from the palace. "Girl, you really think I'm letting you do this alone?" she'd said, booking her flight before Kiana could protest. Now she shared the apartment, her presence a constant reminder that not everything from Dubai had been a lie. The transition back to American life came with its own challenges. The story of a pregnant black American woman returning abruptly from Dubai sparked curiosity in their social circle. Patricia had used her connections to quash the more salacious rumors, but questions lingered. One morning, as Kiana prepared for her prenatal appointment, she found herself struggling with a simple button-up shirt. Nothing fit quite right anymore, her body changing daily, adjusting to carry 2 new lives. "Here," Maya stepped in, helping her with the buttons. "You know, you don't have to be so strong all the time. It's okay to break down sometimes." Kiana caught her reflection in the mirror, her face fuller now, her eyes holding a wisdom born of heartbreak. "I save my tears for the nights," she admitted quietly. "During the day, I have to be strong for them." Her hands cradled her growing belly. The prenatal visits became her anchoring points. Dr. Angela Chen, her OB-GYN, had quickly become both medical provider and confidant. Today, she smiled warmly as she conducted the ultrasound. "Your boys are developing beautifully," Dr. Chen said, turning the screen so Kiana could see. "Both measuring right on track. Strong heartbeats." Boys. The word still brought tears to her eyes. She thought of Rashid, wondering if he ever looked at the ultrasound image she'd left behind. Did he ever wonder about them? Did he lie awake at night, questioning his choices as she did? The apartment slowly transformed into a home. Maya painted one wall of the nursery with a mural, a desert scene under starlight, reminiscent of their wedding night. Kiana often stood there, remembering the way Rashid had looked at her under those same stars, his eyes full of love and promise. Her mother brought over her old rocking chair, the one her grandmother had used to nurse her babies. "Every strong woman needs a place to rest," Patricia said, running her hand over the worn wood. "And baby girl, you're the strongest one I know." But strength had its limits. Late one night, Maya found Kiana in the nursery, clutching one of the tiny onesies she'd bought, her body shaking with silent sobs. "I keep thinking about his face," Kiana whispered as Maya held her. "When he looked at me that last day, like I was a stranger, like every moment we'd shared had been a lie." Maya stroked her friend's hair. "Men like Rashid, they're raised to trust their pride more than their hearts. But these babies, they're going to know their mama's truth." The next day, Kiana started writing in a journal, letters to her sons, documenting every kick, every doctor's visit, every midnight craving. "So you'll know," she wrote, "that you were loved from the very beginning, that your father, he loved us too once, before fear and doubt poisoned everything." As her pregnancy progressed, she found purpose in planning for the future. She took online courses in creative writing, something she'd always dreamed of pursuing. The twins became her muses, their movements inspiring stories she hoped to tell them someday. The Atlanta summer bloomed around them, hot and humid, but familiar. Chiana developed a routine: morning walks in Piedmont Park, prenatal yoga classes, afternoon writing sessions at the local cafe. The baristas knew her order by heart: caffeine-free chai tea with extra honey. One evening, as she sat on her small balcony watching the sunset, her phone buzzed with a Dubai number. Her heart stopped, thinking perhaps... But no, it was just Karim, checking in as he did occasionally. "He asks about you," Karim said carefully. "He'd never admit it, but I see him staring at your photo sometimes." Chiana ended the call quickly, her hands trembling. Later that night, she felt one of the twins kick particularly hard, as if sensing her distress. "It's okay, little ones," she whispered, rubbing her belly. "Your mama's got you. We're going to be just fine." But as she lay in bed that night, watching moonlight paint shadows on her wall, she couldn't help but remember another moonlit night when promises were made under desert stars. She touched the empty space where her wedding ring used to hang and allowed herself one moment of weakness, one whispered question to the darkness. "Will you ever know the truth, Rashid? Will you ever understand what your pride cost us all?" Chapter 10. Truth comes to light. The pristine office of Dr. Zafar al-Mahmoud felt suffocating as Rashid stared at the medical files spread across the mahogany desk. 3 months had passed since Chiana's departure, and the palace had become a mausoleum of regret, each room haunted by memories of her. "I've consulted with specialists in London and New York," Dr. Zafar explained, his voice careful. "Your original diagnosis was based on an outdated testing protocol. The condition they identified as permanent sterility was actually a temporary inflammatory response to a childhood illness." Rashid's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "Temporary?" "Yes." Dr. Zafar pulled out another file, the one Chiana had been trying to show him that last day. "These are the DNA results she requested. Sheikh Rashid, the twins she carries. They are undeniably yours." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Rashid stood abruptly, moving to the window. Dubai's skyline shimmered in the distance, the same view he'd had when he'd watched her drive away in the rain. "She tried to tell me," he whispered, more to himself than to the doctor, "all those meetings with you. She was trying to prove. She came to me desperate to understand how the pregnancy was possible," Dr. Zafar confirmed. "She never doubted you were the father. She just wanted to give you proof you would believe." Back at the palace, Rashid found himself in the library, their special place. The memory of her there, arranging books, humming softly as she worked, hit him with physical force. He pulled out the ultrasound image she'd left behind, finally allowing himself to really look at it. 2 tiny profiles, perfectly formed. His sons. Karim found him there hours later, still staring at the image. "I've destroyed everything," Rashid said, his voice hollow. "My pride, my cursed pride." "She's in Atlanta," Karim offered quietly. "Maya sends updates. She's 7 months along now. The babies are healthy." Rashid's head snapped up. "You've known where she is? All this time?" "Of course. Did you think I would let the mother of your children disappear completely?" Karim sat heavily in a nearby chair. "I've had people watching over her from a distance, making sure she's safe." The knowledge that others had been protecting her, doing what he should have done, was another blade in Rashid's heart. That night, he found himself in her old suite, untouched since her departure. Her scent still lingered faintly, jasmine and something uniquely her. On the small desk, he found a book of Rumi's poetry, the one he'd given her as a wedding gift. A bookmark held a page. "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." The words mocked him. How many barriers had he built? How many walls of pride and suspicion had he erected between them? In his study, he pulled up the surveillance photos that had fueled his paranoia. Now, with clear eyes, he saw everything differently. Every secret meeting with Dr. Zafar had been an attempt to prove her loyalty. Every tears she'd shed had been born not of guilt, but of frustration at his refusal to trust her. "I've been such a fool," he whispered to the empty room. The next morning, he called an emergency board meeting. The members sat in uncomfortable silence as he laid out the truth: his marriage to Kiana, the pregnancy, and his terrible mistake. "I let fear and pride destroy the best thing in my life," he concluded. "I'm telling you this because I intend to make it right, whatever it costs, whatever it takes." Amira, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "The photos you showed me, of her with Zafar, I helped spread those rumors in the palace. I'm sorry, brother. I was so focused on protecting our family's reputation that I helped destroy your actual family." Rashid spent the next week in a fog of activity. He reviewed the generous but cold financial arrangements he'd made for Chiana, now seeing them for what they were, an attempt to buy absolution for his sins. He read and reread Dr. Zafar's reports, torturing himself with the knowledge that a simple retest months ago could have prevented everything. Late one night, he found himself in the palace gardens where she used to work. The jasmine she'd planted was in full bloom, its sweet scent a reminder of all he'd lost. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he pulled up a photo Maya had secretly sent to Karim. Chiana at a prenatal appointment, her belly gracefully rounded, her face serene despite the sadness in her eyes. His children were growing inside her, and he had missed everything. "I will make this right," he vowed to the night sky. "Somehow, I will earn back your trust." But as he stared at the photo, another thought chilled him. What if it was too late? What if the damage he'd done, the cruel words he'd spoken, the trust he'd shattered, had created a chasm too wide to cross? The jasmine released another wave of fragrance, and with it came the memory of their wedding night, of promises made under desert stars. He had promised to trust her, to believe in their love above all else. Instead, he had let his insecurities poison everything they'd built. Now, as Dubai's lights twinkled in the distance, he began to form a plan. He would need to move carefully, humbly. The Rashid who had arrogantly dismissed her explanations, who had hired investigators instead of simply talking to his wife, that man needed to die before he could hope to earn a second chance. But first, he had to face the hardest truth of all. In trying to protect himself from betrayal, he had become the betrayer. Chapter 11. Pride's Heavy Price. The Al-Mansur Palace, once a symbol of Rashid's power and success, now felt like an elaborate prison. Each night found him wandering its halls like a restless spirit, haunted by memories of Chiana in every corner. His massive bedroom remained untouched, as he'd taken to sleeping in the library, their library, surrounded by the books they once discussed together. Tonight, he held the latest ultrasound picture Karim had secretly obtained. 8 months along now, Chiana glowed despite everything. The twins were clearly visible, 2 perfect profiles that made his heart ache with a pain he'd never known possible. "Your father would be ashamed," Madame Safia's voice cut through his thoughts. His aunt stood in the doorway, her traditional black abaya, a stark contrast against the library's warm woods. "Aunt," he began, but she held up a hand. "No, let me finish." She moved into the room, her face softening. "He would be ashamed because he raised you to be better than this, to be a man who listens with his heart, not just his pride." Rashid sank into a chair, the ultrasound picture trembling in his hands. I didn't just fail as a husband. I failed as a man. Yes, she agreed, surprisingly gentle. You did. And now what will you do about it? The question echoed through his sleepless nights. During the day, he went through the motions of running his empire, but his mind constantly drifted to Atlanta, to Kiana, to his sons, growing stronger every day without their father. In his study, a stack of letters sat unsent. He'd written them late at night, trying to find the words to express his regret, his shame, his desperate wish to make things right. Each attempt felt inadequate. Dear Chiana, the latest one read, how do I apologize for doubting the purest thing I've ever known? How do I ask forgiveness for letting fear poison what should have been the happiest time of our lives? The letter, like all the others, remained unfinished. One afternoon, as he sat in yet another board meeting, his phone buzzed with a message from Maya. His heart stopped when he opened it, a video from Chiana's latest appointment. The sound of 2 strong heartbeats filled his earpiece. Excuse me, he muttered, stumbling from the room. In the privacy of his office, he played it again and, again, tears flowing freely now. The steady rhythm of his sons' hearts became a damning drumbeat. Coward, coward, coward. That evening, Karim found him in the garden, standing among Chiana's beloved jasmine plants. She's had some complications, Karim said quietly. Nothing serious, but the doctor has ordered bed rest for the final weeks. Rashid's fingers crushed the jasmine bloom he'd been holding. And I'm not there. I should be there holding her hand, taking care of her. Instead, she has her mother, her friends, Maya. She's not alone. That's worse, Rashid whispered. She has everyone except the one person who vowed to stand by her side forever. The weight of his mistakes seemed to physically age him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of neglect. The palace staff whispered about his late-night wanderings, how he would stop at certain places, the library, the garden, her old suite, as if hoping to find her there. Amira, watching her brother's decline, finally confronted him in his study. This isn't helping anyone, she said firmly. You're drowning in guilt while your children grow inside the woman you love, and you're doing nothing about it. What would you have me do? He asked, his voice hollow. I accused her of the worst kind of betrayal. I had her followed, spy on her medical appointments. I took the most beautiful thing in my life and destroyed it with suspicion and pride. Yes, Amira agreed. You did all that. And now you have a choice. Continue to wallow in self-pity or find the courage to fight for your family. That night, unable to sleep, Rashid found himself in the palace's small mosque. He hadn't prayed properly in weeks, his shame keeping him from even this solace. But now, on the prayer rug where his father had taught him to pray, he finally broke down completely. Ya Allah, he whispered, help me find a way to make this right. Show me how to rebuild what my pride has shattered. As if in answer, his phone chimed with another message from Maya. A photo appeared, Chiana in a rocking chair, reading aloud from a book he recognized. It was the volume of Rumi he'd given her as a wedding gift. The sight of her, one hand resting protectively on her belly as she read poetry to their unborn sons, cracked something open in his chest. He remembered her words from their last confrontation. One day, when the truth finally reaches through your pride and paranoia, remember this moment. That moment had come, and the truth was a sword through his heart. He had taken their beautiful love story and twisted it into something ugly with his suspicion. He had let his fear of betrayal become a self-fulfilling prophecy, pushing away the one person who had loved him completely. Dawn found him still in the mosque, but something had changed. The weight of guilt remained, but alongside it, now burned a determination. He would find a way to make this right, to earn back her trust, to be worthy of her and their children. But first, he had to become the man she had believed him to be, the man who had stood with her under desert stars and promised forever. That man wouldn't have doubted her. That man wouldn't have let pride destroy his happiness. It was time to find him again. Chapter 12. The Children's Birthday. The Atlanta spring morning dawned bright and clear as Rashid sat in his tinted SUV across from Piedmont Park. His heart thundered in his chest as he watched the small gathering forming near the playground. Balloons in soft blues and silvers danced in the breeze, celebrating his son's second birthday. Maya had given him the details, though she'd warned him, "If you're coming, stay hidden. She's finally healing. Don't disturb that unless you're absolutely sure." He recognized Chiana immediately. 2 years had only enhanced her beauty, though there was a new gravity to her movements, a dignity born of surviving heartbreak. She was setting up a small celebration with help from her mother and friends, her laughter carrying across the park on the spring breeze. Then he saw them, his sons. The breath left his body. The twins, Zayn and Zayd, as he'd learned from Maya, were perfect mirrors of himself at that age. The same dark curls, the same olive skin touched by the sun. But their smiles, their infectious laughter, that was all Chiana. "Ya Allah," he whispered, his hand pressing against the window. 2 years. He had missed 2 years. The boys chased each other around the playground, their small feet sure and steady. One wore blue, the other green, but otherwise they were identical. Their energy seemed boundless as they ran between the swings and slides, occasionally returning to their mother for hugs or kisses. Chiana had dressed them in matching shalwar kameez, traditional Pakistani outfits in miniature. The sight nearly undid him. She was making sure they knew both sides of their heritage, even without him. "There." "Mama!" one of them called out. He couldn't tell which from this distance. "Up! Up!" Chiana scooped the boy up, spinning him around as his brother demanded the same treatment. Their laughter merged together, a symphony that made Rashid's eyes burn with tears. As the party progressed, he watched them open presents. The boys' faces lit up at each gift, but what caught his attention was the careful way they looked to their mother after each one, seeking her smile, her approval. She had raised them to be gentle, mindful, loving, everything he should have helped teach them. The birthday cake emerged, a confection decorated with stars and crescents, an homage to their desert heritage. As everyone sang "Happy Birthday," Rashid found himself singing along in his car, his voice breaking on the words. "Make a wish, my loves," he heard Chiana say, as the boys leaned forward together to blow out their candles. What would they wish for? Did they wonder about him? Did they ask about their father? The questions tormented him as he watched them eat cake, their faces smeared with frosting as Chiana laughingly wiped them clean. A gift table sat laden with presents, but his eyes fixed on one particular package, a large, beautifully wrapped box he recognized. He had sent it through Maya, not daring to send it directly. Inside were 2 hand-carved wooden horses made by the same artisan who had made his childhood toys in Dubai. When the twins opened it, he held his breath. The boy's eyes widened with delight as they pulled out the horses. But it was Chiana's reaction he couldn't tear his eyes from. She touched the toys gently, recognition flickering across her face. She knew. Of course she knew. She had seen similar pieces in his childhood room at the palace. For a moment, her eyes swept across the park, and he sank lower in his seat, though the tinted windows kept him hidden. Did she sense him there? Did some part of her know he was watching? The party wound down as afternoon stretched toward evening. He watched as the boys grew tired, their boundless energy finally flagging. Chiana gathered them close, one on each hip, their small heads resting on her shoulders. The sight struck him like a physical blow. This should have been his role, supporting her, helping her, being the father his sons deserved. As the last guests departed and Maya helped pack up the remainders of the party, Rashid finally allowed himself to really look at what he had lost. Chiana had built a beautiful life for their children. She had given them love, stability, and joy, all while carrying the weight of his betrayal. The boys were falling asleep now, still clutching their wooden horses. He watched as Chiana buckled them into their car seats, pressing gentle kisses to their foreheads. Just before she got into the driver's seat, she paused, looking around one final time. This time, her gaze seemed to find his car, lingering for a moment that stretched like eternity. Then she got in her car and drove away, taking his heart with her. Rashid sat there long after they'd gone, watching the sun set over the park where his sons had just celebrated their second birthday without him. The wooden horses had been a risk, letting her know he was thinking of them, that he remembered, that he cared. But was it enough? Could anything ever be enough to make up for 2 lost years? As darkness fell over Atlanta, he pulled out his phone and looked at the pictures Karim had been secretly sending him over the years. The twins' birth, their first steps, first words, all moments he should have witnessed firsthand. The latest photo showed them in their new beds, upgraded from cribs, still insisting on sleeping in the same room. "I'm here," he whispered to the night. "I'm finally here, and somehow, my sons, my love, I will find a way to be worthy of you again." What he didn't know was that at that very moment, in a cozy house across town, Chiana was tucking their sons into bed, each boy still clutching his wooden horse. And as she kissed them goodnight, she caught the familiar scent of sandalwood from the toys, the same scent that had always lingered in Rashid's childhood room in Dubai. Some wounds, she was learning, never fully heal. They just become part of who you are, teaching you lessons you never wanted to learn. But watching her boys sleep, their faces so like their father's, she wondered if perhaps some lessons were worth the pain of learning them. Chapter 13. Fate's Second Chance. The Dubai Mall's grand atrium echoed with the usual buzz of shoppers, tourists and families, enjoying the escape from the summer heat. Chiana hadn't planned to return to Dubai, but a publishing conference had brought her here, her first novel about to be released. The twins, now 2.5, had begged to see the famous aquarium their mother had told them about in bedtime stories. "Mama, fish!" Zayn tugged at her hand, his dark curls bouncing with excitement. Zaid, ever the more cautious twin, held tight to her other hand, his eyes wide at the massive blue wall of water before them. She hadn't told anyone she was coming, not even Maya. This city held too many memories, too much pain. Yet standing here, watching her sons' faces light up at the underwater world before them, she felt something shift in her heart. This was their heritage too, the city their father had helped build. Across the atrium, Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour was leaving a business meeting at the mall's executive offices. The past months had been focused on one goal: becoming worthy of a second chance. Therapy, self-reflection, and a complete restructuring of his life priorities had led him to this moment. Then he saw them. Time seemed to stop. Chiana stood before the aquarium, more beautiful than his memories, pointing out different fish to 2 small boys who were unmistakably his sons. His feet moved of their own accord, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't resist. Zaid noticed him first. Perhaps it was some primitive recognition, some cellular memory of shared DNA, but the boy's eyes locked onto Rashid with an intensity that took his breath away. Then it happened. "Mama?" Zaid tugged at Chiana's sleeve, but his eyes never left Rashid. "Mama, he looks like us." Chiana froze. She didn't need to turn around. She felt his presence like a physical force, the way she always had. Slowly she faced him, instinctively pulling the twins closer. "Rashid," she whispered, his name both a prayer and a wound. He stood there, unable to move, unable to speak. Zayn, bolder than his brother, broke free from Chiana's grip and walked right up to him. "Why do you look like us?" the boy demanded, his small face serious. Rashid knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with his son. His voice trembled. Because I'm your father." The word hung in the air between them all. Zaid moved closer now too, curious but still holding his mother's hand. "Mama," Zain turned to Chiana, "is he really our Baba?" Chiana's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Rashid, still kneeling before their son, the proud Sheikh on his knees in the middle of Dubai Mall, humbled by a child's simple question. "Yes," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "He is." What happened next would be forever seared in both their memories. Both boys, moving as one, threw their arms around Rashid's neck. Something primal, something deeper than memory or reason, told them this man was theirs. Rashid's arms wrapped around his son's for the first time, and he broke. Tears flowed freely down his face as he held them, breathing in their scent, feeling their small hearts beat against his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered, looking up at Chiana over their heads. "Ya Allah, I'm so sorry." The crowd around them had thinned, giving them space, but neither adult noticed. The world had narrowed to just this moment, just this miracle of reunion. "Baba, why are you crying?" Zaid asked, patting Rashid's cheek with a small hand. "Because I'm happy," Rashid managed, "and because I'm sad that I missed so much." Chiana watched the interaction, her heart in her throat. The boys she had carried alone, had birthed alone, had raised alone. They fit so naturally in their father's arms, as if they had been waiting for this moment all along. "Do you want to see the sharks?" Zain asked excitedly. "Mama says they're not scary if you're brave." Rashid looked to Chiana, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, unable to deny her sons this moment. They headed to the aquarium tunnel together, the boys between them, chattering excitedly about their favorite sea creatures. As they walked, Rashid spoke softly. "I've been in therapy. I've learned so much about why I let fear destroy the best thing in my life." "Rashid," she started, but he continued, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can never make up for what I did. But these boys, our sons, they deserve to know their father. If you'll let me, I want to be part of their lives. On your terms, whatever you decide." The twins ran ahead slightly, pressing their faces against the glass as a huge shark glided overhead. Chiana watched them, these perfect pieces of both of them. "You hurt me," she said quietly, "in ways I didn't know I could be hurt." "I know," he replied, his voice heavy with regret. "But they need their father," she continued, "and maybe it's time we both learned how to trust again." Rashid turned to her, his eyes full of the same love she remembered from their wedding night, but tempered now with wisdom and humility. "I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of that trust," he vowed. "Of them, of you." As if on cue, both boys ran back, grabbing their parents' hands. For the first time, they walked together as a family, their son's laughter echoing through the aquarium tunnel, healing wounds that words alone never could. What they didn't know then was that this moment, this chance meeting in a mall they both had almost decided not to visit, would be the beginning of their greatest chapter yet. A story not of new love, but of love rebuilt, stronger for having been broken and mended. Chapter 14. Love's Redemption. 6 months after their chance meeting at Dubai Mall, Chiana stood in the palace garden where their story had begun. The jasmine she had planted years ago had grown wild and strong, much like the love that had survived pride, prejudice, and pain. "Baba, catch me!" Zain's voice rang out across the garden as Rashid chased both boys through the flowering paths. Zaid, usually the quieter twin, squealed with delight as their father scooped them both up, their laughter echoing off the palace walls. The scene before her was everything she had dreamed of during those lonely nights in Atlanta. Their family whole, their love renewed. But the journey here had taught them all precious lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to rebuild what pride has broken. They had taken it slowly, deliberately. Rashid moved to Atlanta first, renting an apartment near their home. He spent months proving himself not through grand gestures or wealth, but through consistency, patience, and unwavering dedication to their sons. Every promise kept, every moment cherished, every mistake openly acknowledged and learned from. The boys had adapted with the resilience of children, their hearts large enough to embrace the father they had never known. They taught their parents perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that love in its purest form knows nothing of pride or prejudice. "You're thinking deep thoughts," Rashid said softly, coming to stand beside her. The boys had moved on to examining a butterfly, their dark heads bent together in concentration. "I was thinking about forgiveness," Chiana replied, watching their sons. "How it's not a moment, but a journey." Rashid took her hand gently. The past months had changed him profoundly. Therapy had helped him understand his deep-seated fears of betrayal, the pride that had nearly cost him everything. But it was the daily work of rebuilding trust. Small moments, honest conversations, vulnerable admissions that had truly transformed him. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the mall?" he asked. "About learning to trust again." Chiana nodded, squeezing his hand. "I remember everything. You taught me that real trust isn't about never making mistakes," he said, watching their boys play. "It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when we're wrong, and to try again." The sound of children's laughter filled the garden again, as the twins discovered a new flower blooming. Their innocence, their capacity for joy, despite the complicated journey that had brought them here, was a daily reminder of love's redemptive power. "Mama! Baba! Look what we found!" Zaid called out, holding up a perfect jasmine bloom. As they walked over to their sons, Chiana reflected on the lessons their story held, how pride could blind even the purest love. How forgiveness required not just words but actions, not just promises but proof. How the heart, like the desert flowers she once tended, could bloom again after the harshest storms. "Tell us the story again," Zayn requested that evening, as they sat together in the garden. "About how you met Mama here." Rashid smiled, pulling both boys onto his lap as Chiana sat beside them. "Well, it began right here, among these flowers. Your mama taught me that real love isn't about perfect moments, but about choosing each other every day, especially through the imperfect ones." "And now?" Zaid asked sleepily, curling into his father's chest. "Now we know that love is stronger than pride," Chiana answered, running her fingers through their son's curls. "That forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as others, and that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our story come after the hardest ones." As the Dubai sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, the family sat together in the garden where their story had begun. The jasmine released its sweet perfume, a reminder of how love, like these resilient flowers, could survive any season if tended with care and patience. Their journey had taught them that true love wasn't about never falling, but about having the courage to rise again. That trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. That pride's heavy price could be redeemed by humility's gentle wisdom, and most importantly, they had learned that in life's greatest storms, love remains the safest harbor, not because it shields us from pain, but because it gives us the strength to weather it together. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding vows years ago, Rashid and Tiana shared a look of deep understanding. Their love story wasn't perfect, but it was real. It had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, deeper, and wiser. The twins had fallen asleep, their peaceful faces illuminated by the garden lights. In their innocent features, they carried the best of both worlds, east and west, past and present, strength and gentleness. They were living proof that love, in its purest form, knew no boundaries. And so their story came full circle, not to an ending, but to a new beginning. For love, they had learned, was not a destination, but a journey. Each day brought new chances to choose each other, to trust again, to love more deeply. In the end, their greatest lesson was simple yet profound. True love doesn't require perfection. Only the courage to try again, the wisdom to learn from mistakes, and the faith to believe that some bonds, even when tested by pride and prejudice, are simply meant to be. The jasmine bloomed on, season after season, a testament to love's enduring nature. And in the garden where their story began, a family stood whole again, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, that the heaviest pride could be overcome, and that love, in all its imperfect glory, remained the greatest miracle of all. If you liked, then subscribe. Love you for listening me.